Hello, everybody. We are live. Welcome to our event, The Four Pillars of a Paid Media Strategy. We have Jonathan here. I'll let him introduce himself in a quick minute. I'm going to go through just a couple quick housekeeping items for everybody to get the best experience out of the event. I think, default for events now, close extra windows or apps to improve the video performance. These chug a lot of the computer. Questions are encouraged. Please throw them in chat or in the questions tab that you'll see on your bottom right, please. We love to have questions throughout. I'll be monitoring and bringing them up as we go. Click the bell icon. The Livestorm has this default feature of pinging you every time. It's now in the top of the chat window. So hit the bell icon to get rid of those crazy notification pings. And then, yes, the recording will be available at the end. Usually a question or two comes in about that, but we will send an email with it on after. And with that, how about some introductions? I guess I'll run through first. For everyone, I'm Colin, head of demand gen here at Clearbit. I'm from Montreal, Quebec. I saw Montreal come in, Amanda. So I'm over in the Southwest. And yeah, I've been at Clearbit for a couple of years now. Came in to run paid media actually, and then promoted into head of demand gen. And how about you, Jonathan? Give a quick intro.
Yeah, sure. So Jonathan, co-founder of Omni Lab, we're run a demand gen agency for B2B SaaS companies, primarily seed to Series B typically. So we do paid media for them, management, building out creative, and ultimately like our goal is creating, capturing demand for those folks, driving pipeline for the business. But I'm out of Washington, D.C. Been here for, I guess, the last couple of years, but been all around the world, lived in Spain for a while. Chicago, we were just talking about cold winter, I think, shot me down to Austin, Texas for a while. So anyway, I've been a handful of different places, but anyway, good to have you all on.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Let's dive in.
Yeah.
We have a little quick overview of the four pillars, and then we'll get into specifics about each.
Sounds good. Cool. So where we're going to start is obviously a couple little pieces of context before I even say this one point here. So predominantly most of this conversation is actually going to be around paid social. Paid search is a little bit of a different beast. So just so everyone knows, if you guys were looking to talk about a whole bunch of paid search stuff, not going to be what this is about. So, but it's going to be about paid social, and we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff around that and how to run a good paid media campaign there. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that we could talk about with paid media, but obviously we're going to focus on the four core ones. So you'll learn first how to properly target and segment an audience. Then we're going to get into, next slide, Colin. Let's work with me here. All right, cool. You're going to learn how to build great creative and content. And then you're going to learn how and where to distribute that content. And then lastly, you're going to learn how to measure the success of paid media. So we're going to try to focus on, I guess, a couple of core points on each of these. Clearly, there's going to be some more things you guys will have some questions about, but Colin and I both will try to get into those as we can. So cool. So let's jump into it here, Colin.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Let's get a little deeper into it. One more slide. All right, perfect. So biggest thing, so where are we going to start is targeting, right? Biggest thing that I see, and I've been, between me and my team, been in more than 100 plus different ad accounts, whether it be Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. And the biggest things is that people are just crazy unfocused with targeting. And of course, the biggest thing, the most important thing about any campaign before you even start it is we've got to make sure that we're getting the message to the right person, right? So typical things that we'll see are like targeting's too broad. They've got everyone loaded into one single audience. They've got all the personas, tons of industries all over the world, right? It doesn't make sense, right? Or other times we'll have, we'll go through an ICP exercise. They'll say, hey, this is my ICP. And I'm like, hey, this is great. Then we look in the ad account. Ad account's not focused on the ICP. So we're like, what's going on here? Something's obviously not making sense. On that note too, the other thing that everyone, if you're a marketer on the call, can probably relate to is clearly aligning with sales is really important too. So a lot of times we'll see that the sales accounts, so for what's the target accounts that sales is focusing on rather, are not even being targeted from a paid media perspective. So it's another thing. Then lastly, decision makers, another big thing. Everyone wants to always target decision makers only because those are the people obviously that ultimately make the decision, sign the checks, but they forget that there's also a group of people that actually feel the pain of your software and are likely to actually recommend software to those decision makers. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. The other dream customers. So imagine you're like a B2B SaaS company, you're selling to SMB, your kind of core target market right now is between 50 to 500 employees, but you want to win Salesforce, you want to win Microsoft, you want to win Oracle, and you want to win some of these like really, really big enterprise accounts. But the reality is that your social proof, your quotes, everything you've done thus far is not focused on some of those bigger accounts. It doesn't mean you can't allocate some budget to it, but just remember that you want to focus initially where you've had the most success, right? Because when people get to that landing page, they get to your website, they're going to be looking for that kind of transparency around, hey, have they worked with people like me? So it's another thing to kind of think about. Segmentation's another big one. There's probably some others in this list, and Colin, maybe I'm going to toss it over to you to kind of comment on a couple if I missed some here. But segmentation, so again, this kind of goes back to like broad audience targeting. But the big thing that we see as well is, especially when you're building out different campaigns, you've kind of taken like your whole entire TAM and stuffed it into one. And a lot of times that audience size is just way too big, and you haven't maybe taken enough time to think about, hey, what specific message or piece of content is actually more relevant. So again, making sure that you've got multiple campaigns. If you're going to be targeting a really big audience, have multiple campaigns focused on people that actually have something in common. Again, another thing we'll kind of dive into a little bit deeper. And then lastly, we're targeting campaigns many times. Again, still we're targeting competitors, we're targeting their own company, we're targeting customers, we're targeting current leads, other things like that. There are definitely strategies for targeting and like doing expansionary types of activities, but generally speaking, if you're kind of just focused on an acquisition, making sure that you're kind of got the proper exclusion criteria to make sure we're not wasting any money on people we don't want to be targeting. So few things there. I don't know, Colin, if you want to add a few things to that. I know there's other stuff missing, but those are some of the biggest things, at least, that stand out to me.
The one thing I'll add in is you talked a little bit about, not segmenting and having a very broad audience.
Yeah.
There's also the flip side of that, which you can go way too narrow, and going very, very narrow on targeting also, it just like throws your CPMs way into the roof and throws your costs really, really high because of the bidding strategies that all these platforms take. So you have to find that kind of like, it's the sweet spot of audience sizes, right? Not too big, not too narrow, just right. And that is honestly a lot of experimentation to try and figure that out for your market. So just take that into account. Like, don't try and be too focused. You can't have an audience of 1,000 people and have performance through the roof, right?
That's a good point. And I'd add too, like, it depends on the maturity of where you are as a company, right? I mean, if you're still very early on and you still don't really have a good idea on who you need to be focused on, it could make sense if you've got the budget to start a little bit broader and test some specific audiences until you feel confident enough to say, hey, I really think we're seeing some good traction here. And not just from a paid media perspective, but also what lives in your CRM. So it's looking at, we're going to talk about reverse engineering your ICP, which I think should be actually helpful for a lot of people here. But
Absolutely.
it's looking inside your CRM and getting into that. So anyway, we'll not jump too far ahead, but yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we have one question that I want to answer while we're here, just around audience sizing. How do you let budget inform targeting and vice versa, to make sure you're adequately matching fuel with the size of the group you're targeting? I will say, like, simple is better in how you're managing your budgets on audiences. Making stuff really complex in ad platforms now just, it doesn't work as well. At Clearbit, we take a three layer approach to budgeting. So we have what we call like ABM audiences. So they're lists that we are pretty confident or very confident in the audience that's in there. So we actually use our own product for it. Shout out to Clearbit Advertising, our acquisition package, to prospect into companies that we know are fits for the business. And that basically, we pile in as much money as we can there before frequency hits the roof. And then we have lookalike audiences that are based on high fit customers. And then we have interest audiences that also have other layers in there other than just interest targeting. But basically, it's max budget on ABM, and then as much as possible in lookalike after the fact, or some varying degree and split and distribution between the top two audiences.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say something similar. I mean, again, I think in terms of like audience size, part of the question was also like how big is big, right? I mean,
Hmm.
general rule of thumb, I mean, we look for somewhere between say 50,000 to say 250,000 people in a
Yep.
given campaign, somewhere around there. Again, it's never black and white, but I guess to Colin's point earlier, I mean, there's definitely too small where it just doesn't make sense. I mean, clearly, if you're going to do a campaign with 10 accounts in it, and there's only a handful of people, not going to work. So you definitely need to expand that campaign out a little bit more, especially if you're even if you're doing an ABM campaign for that matter.
Yeah.
And then really just kind of like, obviously adjust the levers and filters and whatnot in terms of how you're focusing. So that's the only thing I'd add to that, but agree with what you said there.
Cool. We have a bunch more questions, but I'm gonna go on and we'll answer them at the end as we go.
Yeah, perfect. So cool. So how do people feel, right? Like when targeting's not aligned, right, and they see your ad on, let's say, Facebook or LinkedIn, this is kind of how they feel, right? They look at it, maybe they don't even care, they don't notice it, they're out of here, they're walking out the door, right? So that's how people feel. So getting targeting right is really important. Let's go to the next. So let's go next, Colin. Next
It's
slide.
coming.
Okay. There's a long lag, isn't there?
There's a lag. Yeah.
I'm realizing maybe I should have actually led some of the slides now because now I'm going to sit here saying
Yeah.
next time. But anyway, focus is your competitive advantage. So again, like this is the key point. Again, obviously there's a stage of maturity that your company needs to be clear. There's some context there, right, of when you decide to actually really focus down your efforts. So just note that and understand like where your company is today and how well you understand your ICP. Go next, Colin. So again, before you develop campaign, we focus on targeting. So let's go down into the other one. And then I think, Colin, I'll let you kind of say a few things on reverse engineering ICP. Clearbit actually
Yep.
did some awesome stuff on this. And Colin and I were just talking about this. I'll kind of chime in on a couple of these slides as you go through it.
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone that doesn't know, ICP stands for Ideal Customer Profile. Essentially, you boil down the traits that make your best fit customers. And actually, the first step in defining what your best fit customer is defining success criteria to develop actually what that kind of silhouette of the best fit customer is. And I want to be clear because this can change it actually quite a lot. And at Clearbit, we actually did do this as well, and it has changed over the past couple of years. But as you're defining your success criteria, you really want to understand what the business is trying to accomplish, right? Is the business trying to make sure that it's extremely sustainable? You have a really high LTV, you're very likely to renew and to not to churn. Or are you just trying to go for, the highest growth numbers as possible, just straight net new revenue? That can definitely change, what you're looking for in your best fit customer. And then, as a second note to that, your ICP definition is your current state generally of the business. Like we're reverse engineering this from data that we already have. If you're trying to go into new markets or trying to sell to new segments or industries or what have you, whatever that is, you have to remember that. Like they probably will not fit into what your current ideal customer profile looks like. Second step, just like I mentioned, is to look at your past data. So look at the historic data that you have in your CRM. Pull op reports, pull closed won reports out of Salesforce, and again, looking for that success criteria that you're trying to get to. So what accounts actually have the highest LTV or win rate or ACV, whatever you're trying to get to.
And I had one thing to this real quick. I think this is
Yeah.
actually really, really important, this slide especially. And to Colin's point again, clearly if you're trying to go up market or have a new strategy like that, that's completely different. But let's just say that there's still plenty of existing market to be had of the clients that you're already closing. So again, I mean, an easy thing to do is literally go into your CRM and go run a report of all the customers that you closed and then put the headers of all the firmographic criteria or technographic or any other piece of information you have about these people. And you can do this easily right now on the call or right after, and then start figuring out what are the patterns and relationships between all of the customers that you're closing today. How does that relate to the ICP that you've identified?
Mm-hmm.
And also how does that relate to some of the accounts that you're targeting? Now, LTV, I think, is really important for some folks on the call that are maybe more early stage. You might not have a really good indicator of like LTV or churn, for example. Those might be more lagging indicators, which is okay. We can worry about those later. So initially just look at the core kind of firmographic criteria. That's like things like, titles and industries and size of company and all things like that. And then you can start to get an idea of like where you want to actually focus from a targeting perspective. So again, that historical look back is so critical versus just saying, hey, we want to win these accounts over here,
Yeah.
but we never won anything close to them.
There's a difference between what you currently are good at and what you want to be good at. And you really have to make sure that you're figuring out how you're defining that.
Exactly.
One other point on the looking at historic data, and I see a lot of companies, they don't do this. Gather the qualitative stuff, talk to your CS and sales teams on, what's their, it sounds like a gut feeling, but they're talking to the customer day in and day out. They are in it with them. So, some things can't necessarily be found in firmographics, or they're not obvious, right? And talking to your sales and CS teams can really help you at least get that first layer of like, okay, I'm probably looking for companies like this. We actually went through an exercise, which was really fun on the analytics side at Clearbit. We sat down with one of our most tenured AEs and gave him a list of companies that we as a marketing team thought, like, with pulling through firmographic data, would be a perfect fit.
Yeah.
And he clicked on each link, each domain, and went to their website, and it was so surprising. He's like, nope, 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 nope. Yep, I guess so. Nope, nope, nope. Oh yeah, this one's good. And just that experience was amazing. Honestly, it's so clarifying.
No, and you're right. There's some things that are harder to pick out, like, a recruiting firm that's going after people that are hiring, that have a certain amount of recs open. That was an actual account or a client we worked with. So that's very specific, and you wouldn't always see that data listed like literally right in your CRM. So it could lead you astray, to your point. So it's a good call out.
Yeah. Next step is just to analyze for those shared traits. I'd say you're looking for firmographic data at the company level. So could be industry, could be the business model. Like, we see really, really great success with product-led growth companies. So that's definitely a part of our ICP. It could be the number of employees, annual revenue, et cetera. It's just basically whatever traits you can find that relate all those companies together. You're kind of trying to find like the Venn diagram of all of them to get that sort of target, right? And then finally, you start to create a silhouette of what your ICP actually looks like. And so, something like this would end up being a very simple version of an ICP. B2B SaaS, 50 to 1,000 employees, uses one of those marketing and sales tech, and then at least has 10 million in funding. That's an example. It's not exactly ours, but this would actually, this is a good fit account for us, to be honest. But our definition is a little bit more broad than that. But
yeah, that's great. No, I love it. I wouldn't add anything. I mean, I guess I'd actually go right in the next slide, because it actually ties in quite well to what I was just going to say. So then it's like, now you've reversed engineered your ICP, or even ideally, I'd say, before we even started the company, you had a very good idea on who you actually serve. That would be an ideal scenario. Now, that's not always the case for every different startup. But after you've actually done that, then let's say that whether we call this our TAM on the left-hand side or even our ICP, maybe it's just a really big swath of accounts of like a ton of people that we could go after. So then you have to ask yourself, and this is, again, context always on where your company is from a maturity standpoint, but maybe you can break that down a little bit further and look at the people that are potentially where you have a competitive advantage in that market, because there's a lack of competition in a given segment, or the pain potentially is felt a lot stronger in a given segment, where you can break that down. Because again, especially with most of you maybe on this call, if you're working for a VC-backed company, that there's a lot of pressure for investors to deliver results very quickly. So the best way to do that is to make sure we're focusing on the right people that we can close a little bit quicker, that feel the pain stronger, and or where we don't have to compete in a bloody ocean, right? So I think that's a really important about segmentation. And then I think we mentioned this on the first slide regarding decision makers and end users, but so many folks just focusing all their energy on targeting decision makers, really needing to look at also end users too. Because think about this, like, if you're a manager, a VP, a CEO, or C-suite, exec on the call right now, think about the people that you hire. You probably hired someone over the last 6 months. And when you hired them, you're trusting them to actually solve problems and help grow the department, the company, or whatever it may be. So then they're tasked with going to figure that out, which means that maybe they discovered a problem in your organization. So they start researching it. They start trying to figure out, are there tools out there that potentially could actually solve that problem? Or maybe they're the ones directly to actually feeling that pain. So what's going to happen is that they're going to actually do the research, figure it out, tell their boss, get support, and maybe then their boss is actually going to come in inbound, because they were told by the person that they hired that they trust to actually move forward. So you've got to think about that. And I guarantee you that there's someone shaking their nodding their head right now, because this definitely happened, because I know it happened to me. And I did this
Mhm.
for a lot of the bosses that I reported to. So that's something to consider too. And then lastly, would you exactly layer the ad campaigns exactly like this? No, I mean, this is just a very simplistic example, but ideally you potentially might, based on the audience size and messaging content that's available, you might split those out into different ad campaigns. So again, you've got a really great message and piece of content that relates more to each of the different users if there's not something in common between the two. So say that, I don't know if Colin, you'd add anything to that, but very key point on that, decision makers and end users, and making sure you're not forgetting that group of people.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Especially important in a bottoms up model, something like a freemium or a free trial, or so anything that has a free version of a product. It's so important.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Good
cool.
stuff.
Let's move on.
Yeah. So this is just kind of another example of basically what Colin's saying. I think you guys are getting the point now, right? So you've got kind of the left side being certainly a much broader range of focus. You've got multiple industries, maybe multiple geos, employees, very broad range on revenue size, et cetera, where the audience is really big. So again, there's no exact black and white answer to how big your audience should be in any given campaign. Again, probably shooting for somewhere around 50 to 250, somewhere in
Mhm.
that range, 1,000 that is. But ultimately, it's basically just saying, if your audience is really big, it's just a question you should ask yourself: is there still an opportunity to potentially scale this down a little bit and have some messaging content that better resonates? Because again, the better the message aligns with the target, the better CTR, you'll grow your retargeting audiences, and ultimately you'll have more leads and pipeline coming into the business, because the message is obviously makes perfect sense for the people you're targeting. So cool. I think we talked about targeting quite a bit. So everyone
Yeah,
hopefully gets it. Let's move on.
let's get on to creative.
Yeah, totally.
Pillar
Uh,
number 2.
yeah. It's like times two. I'd go to even the next one. Let's just get
Yep.
into it. Yeah. So this is kind of a funny slide. Basically, a lot of content disguised as product brochures, and I think some of you, maybe you're laughing and you're like, oh, I was told by whoever we had to have this content piece that talked all about our product, because our product manager, our CEO, loves our product and wants to talk about it, whatever it may be, right? But ultimately, no one cares about your product. They care about what it can do for you. So it's really focusing in on other areas of your products. That's where you focus on answering your buyers' questions, problems, and jobs. If we go to the next slide, there's a very kind of simplistic matrix that we use internally at Omni Lab, and I know you can talk to Colin. I know you guys do some similar stuff like this as well. But you could clearly make this really complicated, but I'm all for keeping things simple because it makes things easier to implement. So on the left-hand side, where you see sales professionals, marketing professionals, or C-suite, those would be potentially your segments, right? And you could have a whole bunch of different variations of that. And then on the top, you'd have, all right, what problems do they have? What questions do they have? And what do they want? And if you can start answering these questions, and I just put in a couple sample things just so you guys could see what it looks like with it filled out a little bit. Clearly you'd have multiple of these, right? It wouldn't just be filling out one single thing. There's probably hundreds of questions that sales professionals have. Think of Gong and Dooley and all the different content they've created. All of it's answering tons of different questions that they have, right? I mean, one, for example, is how do I write better cold emails? Or do you have any cold email templates that work? Things like that. And so Dooley and Gong, for example, just to point out those, create templates and great content around answering that. So that's how you create really engaging content, especially when we're talking about the top of the funnel. And we'll get into kind of how that content's organized by retargeting and cold and whatnot. But I'll stop myself there and see if Colin, you want to add anything to this.
No, that's exactly it. Like, spot on. I think most people, or not most people, but when folks start out in their ad program, this is what they do. They focus on the product, not on the problems and the pains that they're solving for, and answering those questions. So getting into the types of content or the templates, or any value add that you can add into the prospect's life is the thing to do, right?
Exactly. I've got so much more I could say on the slide. Wow. All right, but we're gonna have to keep moving because
Yeah,
I just
let's
looked at
move
the
on.
time. 125.
Exactly.
All right. So I actually posted this on LinkedIn last week. Less than 1% of people click on your ad, and really what you be doing is optimizing for the 99%. And someone actually commented to me, they're like, well, I mean, shit, if you had a 1% CTR, you'd be killing it. And Yeah, for sure. Like 1% CTR on LinkedIn and Facebook would certainly be good. We've had some campaigns do better than 1%, but yeah, on average, generally somewhere between like 0.5, 0.8%, you're doing pretty well. So ultimately, the thing that you should be focusing on is focusing on driving more of a story inside the feed for all those people that aren't actually clicking your ad, because then you get a whole lot more engagement on the ad itself, and then impressionship of them actually saying, okay, cool, like I got the message here, I got the value, and we'll kind of bring up a couple of examples here if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
But and then I'll stop talking here. But these are two. So by the way, nothing against Drift, love Drift, great company, love all the people that work there. But I think that there's a great opportunity to actually improve this. But everyone's seen creative like this on the left-hand side, where you've got a 3D ebook, which Colin absolutely loves. It's his favorite thing in the world. Just kidding, he hates that. But 3D ebook, that has, probably a catchy headline. Of course, everyone's talking about ABM, so likely there's going to be some interest in clicking on it. But ideally, the way to think about it is, instead of just having the headline with a 3D book, is actually open up the book. It's just like when you get a Kindle, like when you buy a Kindle book and you read the sample, you get to read the first 30 pages. Now, clearly in an ad, we can't put 30 pages of content in an ad. That makes no sense. But if we were to open up the book and actually pull out a couple of highlights or statistics or something of value, then now I don't even have to click the ad. I'm getting some of the value. And on the right-hand side, this one's talking about essentially the less you talk, the more deals you close for sales reps. And I thought this was really good. Gong always does great content. They've got a lot of good proprietary data through their tool. So this works very well. But this is a perfect example, in my opinion, of what is actually telling a story and also delivering a lot of value without needing anyone having to click. So I'll stop myself there. Colin, you want to add anything to that? Is this one example? I think we have another.
Yeah, I want to call out Julia's question. Why do I not like ebooks? It's not that I don't like ebooks. It's that the 3D ebook creative is very much overused. Yes. And is now just you scroll right past it, right? Not engaging, essentially. So ebooks good. 3D ebook in a creative, less good.
Good. Sorry for throwing you under the bus there. Yes.
No, it's all good.
Yes, that's one example. If you were going to say something else, Colin, if I cut you off.
No, it's all good. I'm going to move on, and not to toot our own horn, but Jonathan likes our ad creative a lot, and we actually apply essentially that. Like we try to make every ad a story, or make sure that you get value out of a carousel. So you see, I don't know, maybe some of you clicked on this ad and you saw it on Facebook or Instagram. But you're taking something like the left-hand side, which is, it's the the value prop or what have you, but it's kind of boring. You might scroll by it, versus something that tells a story in a carousel where you're on Instagram, you're scrolling, you're just gonna like swipe through that and get a little bit of value, and maybe click, right? And I think one point too is like you're adding value in the ad. You're not just trying to get the click all the time. You want to make sure that someone gets something out of it just by scrolling through it. And I think that's really important on social channels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. Cool. So on to channels. Channels. So a lot to say on this one, but I guess to keep it relatively simple in the nature of time here, but picking the channels where your audience spends time, right? So how do you pick the channels? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Facebook? Let me give you an example real quick of how to pick channels. So there's a company that I actually just talked to earlier this week. They are, I think, a Series B SaaS company, and they market to two different groups of people. They market to developers, DevOps, and data scientists is one group. And then they also market to folks that are in operations and finance as well. So what they found is after spending time in a variety of different channels, and this probably is actually obvious just saying it out loud, right? But they spend a lot of time inside the channel, connecting with people, talking with people, engaging with content on channels like Stack Overflow and Reddit, and started to notice those two channels were actually much more prevalent for developers and data science to hang out in. So they knew that because they were spending time there. And I think that's the key thing with social channels, is the best way to understand if a channel is good is to start spending time there and seeing if people are active, seeing what's being said, seeing how many groups there are around content related to things that you want to, the people that you want to connect with. So that's a great example there. And then obviously the other side, like some of the ops people, et cetera, they found that there was a lot more engagement from folks in their ICP on LinkedIn and on Facebook. So again, that might be one way that you think about it. ultimately, like the way to pick the channel is like if your audience is there and they're spending time there, their eyeballs are there, then you should have ads on that channel, period. And to say one last thing, lots of people, think Facebook is not a good channel. Colin can probably actually talk to this in a second. But lots of people say, yeah, Facebook, not for B2B. Like no one's in the mood to like buy B2B software on Facebook. And so we don't want to be there. Our audience doesn't hang out on Facebook. Well, the reality is, I forget that someone's going to correct me that looks this up real quick, but something like 2.5 billion people are on Facebook right now. And I believe the last statistic I heard was they're spending around 2.5 hours per day on Facebook, by the way, including Instagram in this as well. So like to say that your audience is the other 4 billion people, fair enough, maybe, but seems highly unlikely that that's the case. It's more an issue that you just aren't really sure how to target inside Facebook because it doesn't provide some of those targeting options. So I'll let Colin maybe say a few things about that, but last point on that.
Yeah, for sure. For reference, Facebook and Instagram, I've been in B2B companies running Facebook and Instagram ads for 5 years or so, and they've generally been some of our highest performing campaigns. So I don't believe anyone when they say B2B doesn't work on Facebook and Instagram. And it's been across a couple different companies. I will say like the best one was a social media analytics platform. So the people we were targeting spent a lot of time on social media. But even at Clearbit now, a large portion of our budget is directly towards Facebook and Instagram, and we're selling to B2B marketing, right? So it's definitely not the same audience. So it definitely works.
Yeah.
And I will say, getting your targeting right on Facebook and Instagram can be very, very hard. There's definitely tools out there. Clearbit has one. There's other tools that are available to help you actually run targeting towards B2B buyers on the platform. So, there's definitely ways to do it. I definitely don't believe anyone say it doesn't work. Something you're doing is probably off if it's not working for you.
Yeah, agreed. Well, cool. Let's jump
Let's
forward.
move on.
Yeah, let's move on. So it's going to talk about something that's very common, where we all like to send our content to the website content graveyard. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. But let's use an example. If you go to the next slide, Colin, of just webinars in general. It could be any type of recorded, video type of thing. But the typical thing that most folks do, and you'll be nodding your head on this because I know it happens with 90% of the people I talk with, we do a good job of promoting the webinar. We use paid, we use organic, we use our email lists, and we get a whole bunch of people to it, right? And I think at this webinar, we had 1,300, 1,400 people or something like that registered. So, hey, that's great. That's awesome. Lots of people interested in the topic. Then we're running the webinar. That's us doing it right now. So cool for the people that are live, for the 147 listening. Now you guys are hopefully getting some value out of it. Obviously, there's another 900,000 plus people that aren't on this webinar right now, so they're not seeing this. So then what happens is then you decide to send the webinar out by email. And let's say the minimum, usually you do that at least to the 1,000 people. And then lastly, you'll go ahead and put it on your website, and either you'll gate it or you won't gate it. I'm not going to get into gated or ungated stuff on this talk, but you'll either do one of those things, and then ultimately the content just kind of sits there, right? So then if you go to the next one, next slide, then you'll see at the top is what we just did before. But now if we actually say, wait a minute, maybe we can actually drive more people to watch this webinar, and we can do it a little bit differently, right? Because we've already created this really great content, and if it's valuable, if like the people that enjoyed, like for example, this webinar, like literally what I'm going to do actually is ask Colin for the recording after this, and I'm going to clip this up in a couple short clips, and I might do 2 or 3, kind of depends. Maybe Colin says something really cool, or I say something really cool or intelligent. And then what I'm going to do is distribute that via, likely for me, organic, but you could also do this with paid as well, where you could make sure you get guaranteed distribution to that audience. And you take a little, say 1 minute, 30-second clip, something like that from something that's valuable from the webinar. So then you're going to drive more views to your webinar. And then you can also repurpose that content in all sorts of other things, right? Like micro posts and blogs and you name it. So ultimately the point is like, the whole reason to do this is don't let your content die in the graveyard on your website. I know that organic's a thing and there's other things that clearly people are going to see in other ways, but make sure that while you have the opportunity and the content's especially fresh, go out and get more people over to that versus just sending it out in your email list and calling it a day, right? This is going to increase content consumption, which is what you want, right? You did a hard job putting this content together, drive more awareness, leads, pipeline, et cetera. So stop myself there. Colin, you want to?
I'll just shout out. We use a service called Procket, which will take this webinar after the fact. They'll take the recording and split it all up for us.
Yeah.
So shout out to them. And this is pretty much exactly the process that we take with what we do. You will probably see ads for this webinar on demand because it performed well in
Love it.
advertising. So you'll definitely see it again for sure.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. I think I've heard of Procket before, actually. It sounded really familiar. And then
Yeah.
if you go to the next slide, here's actually just some like basic, math. And again, don't crucify me on this exactly, right? This is just an example, but this is kind of like what you might expect, just to again make the point on why this is so important. I think most people probably agree this is important, but I know that there's some people out there that just prioritize like, hey, content's old, we already did it. Like, why would I actually resurface this content to my audience? But if you think on the left, right, we say you have 1,000 registrants, then we've got 300 that actually watch the webinar live. And then let's say the recording gets at least at minimum sent to 1,000 people on the email list. Some of you are probably sending it to a much larger nurture list, which is also fine too. But for the simplicity of this example, you just send it to the 1,000 people that actually registered. And then out of that, another 10% of new people from the 1,000 actually watched it. So now you've got 400 people who've watched your webinar. Now the cricket's there because, there's a lot of crickets happening. That's where it went to the content graveyard, and they're just kind of sitting there doing nothing. On the right side, you've got essentially the same 4 rows, but now you're breaking that clip up into a couple pieces, just like Colin said. And then you're potentially getting, again, just an example, but maybe you're getting another 5,000 views of people who watched at least 50% of the clip where they actually got some actual value out of it. Then you're getting another 200 that actually clicked that ad and went down to one of your resources pages. And let's say that clearly not all of those people are going to convert, whether it's gated or ungated. That's, again, an up for question on how you want to do that. But then another 50 people watch it. So again, now you've got 5,450 people in this like very simple example that have at least watched some of your webinar. And some is better than nothing, right? I mean, some of you right now are probably doing some multitask stuff in Slack and other things, which is all good, right? That's why the highlights are there. That's why the recording's there. So anyway, just a little example on, how this kind of all works from a math perspective. Cool. How are we on time? 1:37. Got to go quick. So, so in terms of how you kind of layer content, I'll be very quick with this. This is not a black and white formula by any means, but I know Colin and I generally agree with some of this. Colin might have a few different thoughts, but generally the big thing is like when you're looking at cold audiences, we want to try to focus on pushing content, ideally that doesn't relate to your product. Now, why do I have product marketing up there and cold audiences? Well, in some cases, you might be a little bit earlier stage from a B2B perspective and you don't have a lot of content yet. In that case, it's not a bad idea to have some benefit related value props based on wants or pains targeting that existing audience until you build up some content. We've done this literally with another B2B SaaS company, Series A. They've driven just in the last month, I think 15 leads, at least directly attributable from LinkedIn and Facebook. And then I think well over $100,000 worth of pipeline off of $15,000 in ad spend. And just using product marketing type language within cold targeted audiences. And then what we've done is then in retargeting, we'll usually use trust and credibility type stuff like, hey, here are others like you that use you. Yep. Here's some quotes. Here's maybe a video of someone saying something awesome, right? G2 or Capterra or other awards, if you have them, some third-party validation that just says, hey, like they say we're good too. And then obviously what I think Clearbit, and just to give you guys a huge compliment, I think what Clearbit does such an awesome job is all of you now have probably been to the Clearbit website. So now you're all going to get retargeted tomorrow and for the next 90, 180 days, depending on how they have their campaign set up, with product marketing content to remind you again what Clearbit does, and not the features in the product, but all the cool benefits and the things that ultimately you want. And I think that's ultimately what we're going to do. So, and then obviously channels could be different for everyone here, but leading all that down into these different channels. So I'll stop myself there.
I just want to add one thing on the product marketing style advertising and prospecting or cold audiences. If you have a product that solves a pain, or your product solves one of the pains it solves, I guess, is something that your ideal buyer experiences often. So maybe an example for B2B marketers is like increasing our conversion rate on your website, right? That's something that we're thinking about all the time. That will work much better in cold audiences because they're they're actively engaged trying to solve that problem or having that pain, and therefore they're more likely to click, right? They're more likely to make a quick decision on how to help solve that. If you're doing something like that's very long term or a really big product, you can't advertise the whole product in cold lists. It's just not going to work. Or if you have a product that people think about, once a year, maybe
Mhm.
take like lead routing is always my example. Another B2B marketing thing that we have to think about. Lead routing, you're not thinking about every day or every week. Maybe it's once every 3 months. Maybe it's once every 6. And at that point, like product marketing isn't going to work as well in cold lists, right? The strategy should be to make sure that you're top of mind through educational material for when that prospect actually says like, okay, I'm going to upgrade my lead routing process now. Oh,
Mhm.
geez, I think Clearbit, they showed me some content on lead routing. I'll go check out their website, right?
Mhm.
So just a note on product marketing at the very top in cold audiences, because I think a lot of people end up uh, trying that without the right type of product or without the right type of pain, right?
Good points. Good points. And again, I mean, I think that's where that transition definitely needs to happen, right? And maybe a starting point, but definitely need to transition into some of the stuff that doesn't really relate as much to your product. And that's where we
Mm-hmm.
go back to that content matrix that we talked about earlier, where we're really answering some of those wants, pains, questions, et cetera, with content they actually want. So
Yep.
good points.
Cool.
Um,
Let's run through measurement real quick and then
yeah,
get to some questions.
sounds good. Sounds good. So just so everyone knows, we're not going to get into like a massive like attribution discussion. I think there's actually a great
Mm-hmm.
webinar that I think it was Sassend and one of, I think it was, I forget, someone else from Clearbit on the attribution
Yep.
side. So you guys should tune into that if you want to get into the granular details. But a few notes on just how to measure things. One, you've probably seen a slide like this before. I just whipped this up real quick before this webinar, but clearly the buyer journey is not linear. It's not like you just saw a LinkedIn ad and then all of a sudden that was the only touch point. If I asked you guys right now, like for anyone that's bought software on the call, like think about the last time you bought software. Like what were some of the things you did before you actually converted and filled out a form or a Calendly link or whatever it may be? If you
Mm-hmm.
think about that, you just take a second to think about it. I bet you can think of at least 2 or 3. You probably can't remember all of the different things because who would and who cares, right? I mean, you're just doing your research, right? But the point is just to understand that paid media is not always just a put some dollars in one channel and get some dollars out, especially depending on the strategy you run. And that, not to get too complicated, but if you're running like lead gen capture strategies where it's all about gated ebooks and things like that, potentially you've got a little bit more attribution. You're seeing leads, you're optimizing typically for CPL and more leads. I'm talking about using those channels to actually increase content consumption and guarantee
Mm-hmm.
distribution to your given audience, and not concerning ourselves directly with like, hey, where exactly did the channel come with? Clearly we want to measure what we can, which is actually the next slide if you want to go down there. So, like my general viewpoint, maybe Colin, you've got some different thoughts. This is what everyone argues about all day, by the way. So we're all going to probably have slightly different ways that we think about this, which is okay. You have to just stick to something is the most important thing here. But my belief is that you just can't track everything. I know you can't. There's this podcast and webinars and Slacks and forums and organic posts on LinkedIn. There's
Yep.
you're running create demand programs where you're running ungated content and doing what I said for optimizing the 99%. Colin
Yep.
mentioned this to me before, and he's going to say it probably now, which is you've got to look at the aggregate marketing funnel and
Exactly.
not just look at each channel. So I'll give you a second to chime in on that one, on that point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, I'll shout out just a great example. I just linked Procket up in chat right now, and I see a couple hearts for that. How many people clicked on that link? Where's the attribution, right? Like, we're
Exactly.
not going to know,
Exactly.
they're not going to know. Maybe on a sales call, they'll say, oh yeah, I saw you on some webinar,
Exactly.
and that's about it. So remember, remember that you can't measure all of it, even though you want to. And
Exactly.
yeah, like I think when we're talking about what you actually need to measure, yes, you need to have attribution. Yes, you need to look at what pipelines generated from paid or what leads come from paid.
Yep.
All of those things do matter. You have to look at it.
100%.
But the actual success of your marketing strategy or your paid strategy isn't just directly attributed to paid,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to look at the overall numbers that you're generating. What's marketing's contribution to pipeline or to revenue, depending on how fast you can get there. We look at pipeline at Clearbit. We have a little bit of a longer sales cycle for some segments, so that's where we're at. We are trying to get to revenue at some point, but pipeline for the time being. What's your conversion rates to the funnel? The biggest one I think is CAC and CAC payback. You have to have a healthy cost of customer acquisition, right? And that's not just from your ad spend. That's all dollars, sum total that you spend on your go-to-market motion. and paid does end up being a large chunk of that, depending on your budgets. But you have to look at it, as a holistic program. You can't just look at it as, okay, well, this ad generated this specific opportunity, which closed for, $200,000 or whatever. It doesn't matter, because they probably saw 10 ads and
Exactly.
they probably clicked 5 times. And then finally they searched a brand on Google and converted off that's, your organic result, or they converted off your brand ad that you have to run to compete against your competitors at the top of the page, which everyone hates doing, by the way.
Exactly.
Google's default.
Completely. Yeah, no, I think you said it. I think you said it well. I wouldn't add too much. Yeah, measure what you can. Clearly, you have to understand what paid is producing, regardless of the strategy. So definitely have a dashboard around that, which most of you hopefully do. But just make sure that you're also looking at the aggregate funnel, because we know that there are certain touch points that cannot be tracked. So, roll back to those lagging indicators on the right-hand side. By the way, this slide is not to say that none of the things on the left are not important. Leading indicators are actually extremely important to look at. So it's just really to say that marketers have generally historically focused a little bit too much on the left and not enough on understanding what's going on the right. You'll notice that most of the things on the right are all found in the CRM. Most of the things on the left are found in either Google Analytics or found in the ad channel many times. So it's just bridging the gap between those two. And there's tools that do this, or you can build your own, model, obviously internally, like Clearbit has. But just so everyone knows, I'm not saying the left side is not important. Clearly, those things are important. It's just that we've got to make sure we're ultimately driving the right types of conversion rates to the funnel on the right-hand side.
Yep. And for reference, like I say that we manage to a pipeline number and to a CAC number, but we have KRs that are leading indicators. We have conversion rate key results that we monitor over the quarter. We have cost per qualified lead numbers. It's just that when we look at the success of a program, we're not looking at those directly. They're indicators to success, but they aren't the definition of success.
Exactly. And then, I think a good example of that, if you go to the next slide, again, I always love simple examples. You can make this way more complicated for everyone listening, but big thing is, like, you look at the left-hand side, and I think the big thing about how you measure things is thinking about the measure of success. Now, there might be some of you where your measure of success is leads right now. And if that's the case, then you're definitely in an organization where you still need to, obviously, you don't want to put your job in jeopardy, right? So that means that potentially there needs to be some realignment with leadership on making sure that you're driving some of the other metrics in terms of pipeline and revenue up. But on the left-hand side, we've got $50,000 of ad spend, 100 leads produced, CPL is $500 a lead, and then 10% of those are converting with $150,000 of pipeline, and ultimately ending up with $22,000 of revenue. So there's optimizing for leads. So I've got 100 leads on the left-hand side, but I've only got half on the right. Half the leads on the right. My CPL is double. Well, that doesn't sound good. I don't want double the CPL. That's not a good thing, right? But wait a minute. Then I look down and I start looking at the conversion rates to the funnel, and I understand that that's actually a better thing. And I wouldn't realize that unless I went into the CRM and understood that, wait, these leads that we're actually sending sales are converting at twice or three times the rate than they typically do for other programs we're running. So the big point here that I'm trying to make is, again, make sure you understand what you're actually trying to optimize for. It doesn't mean that we don't want to see if we can reduce our cost per lead. Of course we do. Who wouldn't want a cheaper lead? Obviously. If I can use my money more efficiently, I'm going to do it. But I'm not going to do it at the expense of downstream metrics. And that's the important point.
Exactly.
So we're good till 2, right? 10 minutes, right? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we'll keep going. We'll answer the questions if people are sticking around, and they can watch the recording if they have to hop.
Yeah, cool. This is an example. I thought I'd share this. There's 1,000 ways you can format stuff like this, but this is something you could use for tracking success. So there's a couple of different ways to think about this. You could have this. So we have a couple for some of our clients where we're looking at channel by channel, right? And we're looking at a lot of the metrics you see here. Then we've got a roll up of all paid media. So it rolls everything up, because again, some channels are not always going to be directly attributable. They're more brand awareness, things of that nature. And then the last thing is you might have these same metrics, rolled up to the aggregate marketing funnel. So just look at the total amount of inbound. And obviously, of course, from a cost perspective, you'd want to have your full cost of marketing, right? Not just ad spend. I know we're talking about paid media right here. So clearly you'd want your full cost of marketing included in this to really have some of these numbers right. But this is something that you could use, and we usually look at it on a monthly basis. But if you're a lower ACV business or more transactional, then maybe it makes sense to potentially look at it even, weekly or maybe even daily if it's a really transactional business. But for most of the folks that we work with, it's just there's not enough. There's so much variation when you start looking at it at a granular point that we usually look at it month by month so that we can make turns like that from an ad creative perspective. So, any thoughts? How do you guys look at it, Colin? I mean, anything similar to this?
Pretty close to this, to be honest. And for anyone out there, like if you're reporting into the CEO or the CFO, or they're at least looking at your programs, this is what they want to see. They want to see how much did we spend, and then how much did we get out of that spend, sum total, right? That's how you run a business. When you get into those very, very specific points on, okay, per ad, what did we spend? What did that one ad drive, et cetera? C-suite doesn't care. Even the VP layer or anything above that, they don't care necessarily, right? They just want to know how much money did we spend, and then is the program going well? Like, is it successful? So keep note of that. But no, we look at this pretty much in the same way. We do have quite a few more stages that we look at if we are digging in. But from a roll-up view, this is pretty much what we would do.
Exactly. Well, cool. I'll get a couple of things and we can roll back to a few questions with the last few minutes here. This is this is impossible to read, so apologies, not very good on the slide. But at any rate, I actually put this out on social media a few weeks ago and got a lot of good engagement. And I really did it just to kind of help people out. And it's something that everyone really should have, hopefully, in one place. It doesn't need to look like this in this framework, but basically this is obviously a spinoff. If you've seen the business model canvas, it's a spinoff of that, and just something a little bit more narrow that actually looks at it from a marketing perspective. And it really hits on most of the key areas. So obviously, we just talked about 4 big things, obviously, on this specific chat here. But there's obviously other things that we didn't talk about, right? We haven't gone into the depths of attribution. We didn't talk marketing ops, right? We didn't talk about budget and resource planning, things of that nature. So there's obviously lots of other things to focus on. So anyway, this could be a good tool for you guys. If you want to go to the next slide, there's a little QR code I made. It's not gated and there's no emails that follow. We don't do any of that, at least at Omni Lab. But if you wanted to get a copy of it and just make a copy for yourself, and obviously you could turn it into whatever you wanted, right? If you wanted to throw it into a different format and all sorts of things, then feel free. But the big point is if you could create something like this and have it all in one area, it creates great alignment. Share that with your CEO, share that with your CMO, et cetera. And then now we're all on the same page. We know the ICP, and also I should say the sales team, of course, too, right? Are we all on the same page? To Colin's point earlier, hey, we're targeting these guys. Are these the guys that you would like us to be targeting? And like Colin said, one of his sales reps is like, no, none of these are red accounts. But like that conversation is so important. That's a good conversation. I want to hear that. And know very quickly, like if these aren't the right folks we should be focused on. So anyway, this is kind of at least a framework. I know, Colin, you love my frameworks and models, but a way to think about it. So hopefully that's helpful for those that want.
All right, y'all. Let's try and get to as many questions as we can. Speed round. Is there an experimentation process you would recommend? Let's say you've just started working on a new campaign without much insight regarding messaging and targeting. Which variable should we test first, second, third? I have a good answer for this.
Go ahead.
Targeting, offer, creative. Those are your first 3. Those are going to be your highest lever activities, at least to get a click, right? Landing page is another matter. You have to do that too. But those top 3 are going to be where you want to start out. They're going to be your highest lever activities.
I love that. No, I completely agree. I was going to say pretty much the same thing. And obviously you could layer in like messaging or content into that if you're kind of grouping that as offer. But yeah, 100%. You got to get the targeting right. And that's why we started that at the beginning of this presentation. So without that, obviously, like for example, I could have the best creative, best offer, et cetera. But if it's targeted the wrong person, they're dice. So make sure that you've got the targeting locked in first. And clearly, let's be real, like clearly as a marketer, we're obviously going to be making adjustments to other things there. Down in the funnel, but get the targeting right and then work on the next things in terms of experimentation. Good point. Yep.
What are your thoughts about going broad with targeting and letting platform algorithms tune from there?
I don't know. I'll say one thing on it. I mean, I think, again, depends on the stage of your company. I guess I'd ask where are you in terms of stage? I mean, unless we're just talking about letting the platforms optimize for it. Generally speaking, like if you still don't have a good understanding of who your ICP is and you're still figuring things out and you're wanting to do that with paid media, I think sometimes that can be a little bit expensive. By the way, there might be other channels that might be better to do that testing initially if you have no idea, like just even doing cold emails or other things like that. But if you do have the capital and you feel somewhat confident, then yeah, starting broad initially and doing some testing and splitting those into different segments is what I would be doing, so that I could see the performance of each of the different campaigns to understand, hey, which audience is obviously performing better. And like Colin said, what I would do then is then have probably the same or similar, assuming that the audience types are going to be receptive to the same type of offer. I would keep some of those variables the same and just make the target the difference. So that way I can understand, all right, who's being more responsive to at least this offer that we think is relevant to all three. So that'd be one way to think about it. Unless if I answered the question well, maybe Colin, you've got some other thoughts.
No, I think you nailed it.
Cool.
What's your favorite approach to creating paid social audiences? Lookalikes, exact emails, retargeting, etc. I think we might have covered some of that in the targeting slide and layering the content types. I'll just say again, the way we do it is ABM or exact email audiences that we can get and that we run. Again, Clearbit advertising as a product or acquisition package. It's definitely something we use to accomplish that personally. Then we do lookalikes based on best fit customers generally, or high performing customers. And then we'll go to something like interest, and then retargeting is layered in there as well. So just across the board targeting.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, no, I think those are a lot of the ones. I mean, sometimes folks don't have an actual target account list for ABM. So if that's the case, then obviously you'd start somewhere different. Just make sure you've got the right firmographic criteria. And then the big thing too is, I mean, especially on Facebook, ideally we've got access to some type of third-party data to do some better firmographic targeting on Facebook. That's a really big thing. It kind of depends. Sometimes you can get away with it with lookalikes and with some interest-based categories in Facebook and still do a pretty good job. I mean, if you've got a slightly broader audience and you can capture some people in interest-based categories and you're all right, having a few people get an ad that, you know, clearly are not going to be the right fit, then sometimes you can do without third-party data, especially if your spend is really low. It might not make sense yet. Maybe, Colin, you've got some thoughts on this, but I think generally we want to spending a little bit more money on Facebook, upwards, closer to 8, 10K a month at least, before we start investing in some of that, additional third-party data. But again, it depends on the market, right? If you're really niche and you've got a really specific, ICP, you're trying to run an ABM campaign, that's a great opportunity where I wouldn't want to use the out-of-the-box targeting in Facebook. I'd want to be leveraging either Clearbit or, like Colin said, there's some others out there as well, so that I can make sure I'm definitely getting this out in this message. So I'm spending my money the most efficient way possible. And that's going to drive higher conversion rates of the funnel. So even though it costs some money to get a third-party, some third-party data, whether from Clearbit or other, like it's probably going to be worth it because the conversion rates are going to pan out later down in the funnel because your message is getting to the right people. So something to think about there.
All right.
Cool.
Let's see. I think we answered that one already. Do you recommend running conversion campaigns to cold audiences? Depends on the goal of the campaign, to be honest. So yes and no. We run both awareness style and also conversion. So
When do you
it really
guys,
depends on the action.
just to dig into it, because this would be a follow-up, but like when do you guys, what would be a situation where you would run conversion-based objectives in a cold campaign? Like what would you be doing in terms of like content or the campaign?
Yeah, it depends on the goal. The goal generally, so like a product marketing type, we would run conversion. Like we would try and optimize for the form conversion, or even another down funnel metric using offline conversion tracking. And then when we're like talking about something like awareness or maybe video view or something like that, it really is when we want to make sure we're getting the content across or the value of the content across. So it's generally like, is the action you want someone to take a form submission? Then use a conversion campaign. Is it just to view the video? Is it to just click to your blog post? Whatever you're running, that's generally how we choose. And I will say, just as a side note, we have run awareness, so where the goal is for them to watch a video, but using conversion campaigns, and it has actually worked better in some cases. So some weird advertising is this weird black magic, sometimes. And,
I haven't seen that one before. That's interesting.
Yeah. So try it all, I guess is somewhat the answer. It kind of is hard, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had
Yeah.
one last thing. I know we're at time and I need to jump on
Yeah.
my meeting, but I did one
Yeah.
last thing is that on that point, yeah, we definitely play with objectives clearly, but just know that like the objectives you're choosing, of course, the platform is going to optimize for the people to actually take that objective and also the data that you feed into it. So, many times, like for example, other objectives like brand awareness or traffic, et cetera, can be great objectives as well, because then LinkedIn or Facebook or whoever, whatever social platform you're looking at, is actually going to start optimizing for that group of people. So it's going to open up the amount of people that they're actually going after. Because what LinkedIn's essentially doing is taking your whole audience and saying, okay, cool, this is the group actually that are more likely to actually convert either based on data or based on historical data that LinkedIn's gathering, et cetera. So you've got all these other people over here that aren't the typical people that convert. So just think about playing with some of the objectives and or having sometimes multiple objectives running at the same time so that you've got optimization across multiple different things. So again, lots of complex, lots of different ways to do it. But anyway, hope everyone enjoyed. I'll let you close out, Colin.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for coming, Jonathan, and sharing your wisdom. It's always fun to chat with you.
Likewise, you as well, of course.
For anyone's questions we didn't get to, we'll share the list over with Jonathan, and maybe we'll get to some of them after the fact. And I'll make sure that we get this demand gen canvas out to everybody as well. So thanks everyone for coming. Really enjoyed the chat. We'll see you later.
Yeah, I seen y'all. Thanks for coming. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.